Hello, and welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnicek.
And I'm Sarah Beckner.
We will be offering monthly forecasts based on the new moon lunation charts, looking at mundane astrology, which pertains to events happening on the world stage.
We'll describe what we see using both neoclassical and Uranian astrology techniques.
In addition to the forecasts, we also have shows that include blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and more lengthy discussion on topics of interest.
So stay tuned, and if you're so inclined, like, follow, and subscribe, and don't be a stranger. And now, keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans. So here we are, coming together to look at the Libra lunation, which in this case is a very special lunation because it's an eclipse. And so really the effect of this new moon solar eclipse is going to take us all the way into April 29th when we get the next solar eclipse in the sign of Aries. So this is a very potent month. There's a lot going on. I know that Lisa has done, you did so much research and such a deep dive, Lisa, as you prepared for your talk about elections that you presented for OPA recently. And so let's just dive in without any astrology, just for the layperson, and talk about what we're really looking at in this next 6 months.
This next 6 months certainly have a focus on the leadership and the power of the leadership potentially, and the ways that maybe the leadership isn't always as forthcoming as we may prefer for them to be. And another thing that Sarah and I were speaking to right before this, and Sarah pulled this out of my head because it's something that I hadn't really wanted to say, as I've been looking at, and we've both been looking at a lot of these monthly lunation charts month after month, and as well as other key charts, is the current leadership that's in place right now isn't healthy. There's a weakness to the leadership. And we've already seen this manifest as Biden stepped down from the presidential candidacy and now is in this extended lame duck session. However, we're really concerned about the state of his health by looking at these charts in general. There's just a lot suggesting that his robustness is very weak. And of course, we would never want to predict somebody passing on, but we could definitely see major disruption to his health in the coming months as well. And it's hard to say, maybe he's still in office when that happens. Maybe it's something that comes after. It's hard to say the potential for substantial decrease in his health and his vitality. So I think that was what I wanted to start out with.
I think it's that combination of loss with all of the overarching themes of volatility and disruption and, oh my gosh, shock, surprise, anything could happen.
Yes. And that has been a huge theme for this year.
Yes. That's the imprint for the whole year. There's just so much that speaks to a certain level of sort of passion, knee-jerk reactions, hasty actions, things catching us off guard. When I was trying to think about some of this stuff on a personal level, it kept reiterating the need for us to have some level of emotional regulation through it all, because it certainly doesn't look like from the top down that's coming.
Yes,
we've already seen two assassination attempts on a president. That's the first time in quite some time in our history that we've seen that. So that's another sign of this strong element of loss and disruption that we keep seeing in these charts.
And the disruption is huge. And the disruption is also how unconventional everything has been. And we don't have a baseline for how to move forward with a lot of the ways that things have unfolded, from Vice President Kamala Harris coming in to be the Democratic candidate to, like you said, the attempted assassinations that we've seen. And
the felony charges against Trump.
Yes.
Our president is technically a criminal. That's something we have to contend with.
Exactly. And those are just the main themes. And I've been scouring the news much more recently, and the mayor of New York City is going through legal challenges for a lot of criminal activity that he's been involved in. So we're seeing leadership show itself in weak and untrustworthy ways. And that really affects the American people. And I think also in some ways allows for some of this heightened criminal activity that we see, like the attempted assassinations, to take place. Because when the top is spiraling and working outside of its traditional reliable means, then that creates the loopholes and the ability for unpredictable actions to take place within the day-to-day environment.
Yes, because typically government is under the domain of Saturn, which is slow moving and stable, and it's supposed to be due process. And so to have all of this pressure being exerted on us right now, that is a little bit, it's a little Wild West. That's how it
Yeah,
feels.
definitely,
Yeah.
which is very Uranian, and we'll get to that once we reach the astrology side of it. But another important highlight for this month is also women. And we've seen this come up again and again. Specifically, I think we really tuned into it with the Aries ingress chart. And we didn't know it at the time that it had to do with Vice President Kamala Harris running for president, but also women's rights, sexual rights, that sort of thing. And it was also the Aries solar eclipse chart pointed.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't know if you've had the experience since we've been doing this, Lisa, of when I started solar return charts, it became clear pretty quickly that people start feeling into the next year a couple months before their
Right.
solar return. And I feel like since we've been doing these monthly lunations, I can feel literally in the week before the lunation, all these things pop up. So,
Yeah.
and right now I see everybody putting up the signs for Colorado supports women's reproductive rights. I'm seeing a lot of the things that show up in this chart, even when we get into it. There's the piece of illness and diminished vitality that we
Mhm.
saw in the chart. And it just seems like everyone is sick right now. So, yeah, I don't know if you've noticed that.
Absolutely. And I think that this eclipse season that we're recording this in the middle of is taking a toll on people as well. And it feels very appropriate that we have this eclipse season where reality gets lifted up a little bit and spun in a different direction that's more attuned with fate in taking it out of our hands. And it's taking place right before this election. It just makes a lot of sense to me in looking at the astrology. And I've written about this in my recent newsletter that it feels like where we're at right now is in a point where things are just getting shaken up in order to prepare for 2025 and 2026 when massive changes are on the table. And it's not that all of a sudden we're going to wake up in 2025 and it's going to be completely different. It's just that, and it's going to be a process. But we're going to look back on this time, I think, and understand that's what's happening is that things have to become dislodged in order for us to move forward and embrace the huge changes that are ahead of us in the coming years.
Mhm. Yeah. And I do feel like the strongest developmental pressures that come in, astrologically speaking, through the trans-Neptunians, through the outer planets, those things often we can't see it clearly in the moment. Since I've been studying astrology and looking at longer cycles and seasons, and when you reflect back, you realize here we are trying to get a real grasp of what it looks like, but we don't
Mhm.
really know what's being disassembled
No,
or
there's
purpose.
disassemblage happening. And that's such a beautiful point about astrology in general as we go through the mundane parts of our day. And it's so difficult until you have the hindsight is 2020 perspective to understand what you were going through. It just felt like a day-to-day thing that may have been more or less challenging than other days, but you're just in it and you're doing it. You're doing life. Yeah.
this lunation will be most impactful for people with degrees. And what is the degree of this?
It is
Up the
10
chart.
degrees Libra 3 minutes.
So anybody with 10 degrees of the cardinal signs will be particularly impacted by this for the next 6 months. Is there anything you want to say? Do you want to speak to just the individual on a personal level navigating this astrological weather before we dive into the...
I mean, I think the thing that really hit me with this lunation is that, so we have both Mars and Uranus aligned with this lunation. So it brings in the same volatility, destabilization, and it can be a real division between people. And we can feel this division widening and widening. And I think it's so perfect that eclipse is in Libra, because Libra is a sign of bridging and bringing people together and seeing all sides. And I really sense that the medicine of this time is in how can we bridge our differences? How can we really hear one another out and not get so stuck in whatever idea or perspective that we're in? Because everybody has the right to their own perspective. And so embracing that, even when it's very hard, and using those skills of pragmatism and overall human respect.
Yeah, there's a lot of pull between the really sensitive places, the watery, deeply feeling stuff, the
Mhm.
seeking, the longing, and then the more Martian, turbulent, quick to rise, impassioned, more hasty thing. And where do we find the grounding in that? How do we get out of all of that reactive, deep feeling place so that we have access to more of the high road iteration of planetary offerings? I think about Poseidon and how beautiful it can be in the universal sense of compassion and coming together and seeing how we operate as one organism. And yeah, I guess just in our own personal sphere, their own little pockets of the world, finding ways to hold that, stay regulated, take a breath, keep seeing our neighbors as our neighbors, and ride it out.
Mhm. Absolutely. Beautiful. Good medicine for this time for sure. We are going to move into the astrological portion of this. So, for those of you who cannot stomach all of the jargon, this is your moment to step away, and we hope to see you next time. And for those who just hunger for some astrological jargon and technique and are excited to jump into these charts with us, here we go. So, do you want to take us into the chart, Sarah?
This is such a potent picture when you look at it right off the bat, that the opposing leadership, which would be the Republican Party, is up at the top of the chart, conjunct Poseidon. And so we know there's a lot of visibility. And when I'm looking on the dials too, one thing we didn't talk about, Lisa, that I saw was that signature for plutocracy, the sort of Hades Chronos,
Mm-hmm.
and how the money factors into all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see on the descendant trio of Mars, Hades, Chronos. And then again, just the fact that Mars is angular really speaks to what we're talking about in terms of
There we go.
the volatility, the hasty actions, things getting inflamed, impassioned, warring,
Yeah.
disputes.
Yes. One of the things that we were looking at right before we came on was here at the declination table, we have this whole group of fun aligned with the ascendant. So we have Jupiter, we have Kronos, we have Cupido, Mars, and Pluto, all in a declination relationship to the ascendant. And that is a powerful signature to have. It's a great signature, I think, for a chart representing an election, and a very important election where the people, the environment is very concerned with who's in power, who holds the power. It really looks like there's powerful drive to rally around those who are in power, and that it's something that's really at the forefront, right?
Obsession, separation, fixation. Yeah,
Yeah.
all of the people tracking it all
Yeah.
really closely.
So what did you want to bring up next, Sarah?
Let's look at the 360-degree dial. Because one of the first things we saw on that dial was the eclipse connected to Chiron Neptune. And I think this is interesting too, coming off our last eclipse, which Neptune was very involved in that eclipse. And then afterwards, we had the Sun Neptune opposition, as this really magnifies all of those Neptunian things you were saying, the nefarious pieces, the deception, the delusion, the longing. The piece about illness, I was telling you, I always see things the week before we go live with this stuff. And I just opened up the latest edition of Harper's yesterday, and there was a big spread on electromagnetic sensitivity and multiple chemical sensitivity, and people who are trying to find the last vestiges of untouched wilderness, really permeable and vulnerable and affected by these larger cultural currents.
And this is also part of this symbology that reinforced a sick leader. We have a leader who isn't well. When you have Chiron and Neptune in close association with, in this case, the sun, which represents leadership, that's saying that the leader is literally sick. And this is one place where we saw that.
Yeah.
And then we have Jupiter and Pluto, part of that declination picture that we pointed to before. So a lot of exuberance around who has the power. And this could work good if we have strong leaders. But part of the problem with this picture is that it's showing that the leadership is not well. And if we move over here, we see the Hades with the Cupido down here. Hades is a reiteration of sickness. And Cupido is suggesting that which is bringing the people together is not good for the people.
Yeah. And then we see that idea of the plutocracy again with the Jupiter Pluto, that the money and the power are so intimately connected in a way that facilitates some of this deception and delusion, and is a source of wounding and a source of brokenness in the way our systems work.
And it just looks like a ton of corruption, whole lot of corruption. And we could even pull in this Uranus as well. The disruption is happening because of the corruption is what would come to my mind with that.
Should we take a look at the 90?
Let's do it. So here's the 90. We're going to go to Ascendant Kronos right here.
Oh gosh, this is another one that points to some loss, because we know that in Uranian astrology, Kronos is indicative of the leadership.
Yep.
And here we have a magnification, Volcanus, of loss, Neptune, or sickness, or frailty.
Yeah.
And so we see that there's even a further weakening of the guard of the who's in power.
And then we have the Chiron coming in right here too,
which I think keeps showing us again and again that the way Neptune is showing up is not all love, peace, and universal connection. This Neptune really is pointing to more a concrete reality of loss, deception, frailty, infirmity, lack of reliability.
And I wanted to quickly look at this picture as well. Mercury right across from Uranus. And Sarah and I have spoken quite a bit about children and how children in the world are really highlighted at this time. And overseas, we have so many children who are innocent victims to the wars that are happening. And then in our own country, I think it's heightened with this election cycle is kids having lots of bomb threats or threats of violence within their school, which is just, as a mother, it's horrific. I think I sent you an article about this, Sarah. Very recent time, there have been a real uptick of threats on schools. And I saw this really disturbing statistic that a certain percentage of these kids who have been arrested for threatening the schools have been under the age of 12, which is just, if your heart isn't getting pulled out of your chest with that statistic, I don't know. I just don't understand. And we see volcanics in close enough range as well, which is heightening Uranus. And this is a theme that we see over and over again. And if we were to turn the dial to the Aries point or the MC, we would also likely see these same signatures being pulled in. So it's quite personal to the United States, and it's also tied into the world at large. Children are in an edgy place. They're not in a place where they may necessarily feel as safe as children should feel in this world, because children are hope and promise for the future.
And we see Poseidon is probably within range there too. So part of what's happening culturally is affecting the kids in a really visceral way. And I do think some of that, like we talked about earlier in the year, has to do with the technology piece of Uranus, that these are
Yeah.
really the first generations coming through with technology at their fingertips.
Absolutely.
And the anxiety and disruption. And I've seen here actually also in the last week, there are some kids in my local community that are starting to really vocalize their lockdowns
Yes.
nonstop. And they're terrifying. In the town I live in, they decided to lock up the phones for the school day.
Mm-hmm.
So they make them check them in, which is great in terms of attention in the classroom. But now you have kids in situations where they're on lockdown and they don't know if that's going to be the last text message or outreach or conversations they have with the people they love. And my heart goes out to them because I can't imagine living under that kind of constant threat. It would be anxiety inducing. And indeed, that's what we see in this picture. Not just Mercury as children, but Mercury as the mind, our communication, the intellect that's anxious, unstable, volatile. And we're all swimming in those waters.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think because this chart is looking to 6 months ahead, this is a theme that we're going to likely continue to see evolve, unfortunately. And Mercury's the news cycle in general. Heightened news. Everybody's nervous systems are under duress right now. And if there's any advice that I would give for the coming 6 months, it's really watch your nervous system. Anxiety is high. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with other people.
While you're driving, Mercury, like when you're on the road.
And as you're
Beware,
speaking
yeah.
with people,
Yeah.
and all of it. When you're speaking to yourself, be patient and just remind yourself that we are in this time of a lot of tumultuousness. And as much as that's challenging, it's also part of why we came here and became embodied in this lifetime. So,
And even more, I think it really speaks to the astrology in an immediate sense that we keep seeing this Chiron show up in all of these charts, and we see Hades and Pluto show up in really powerful ways. It reminds me of being in this kind of diagnostic period. You really can't tend to something or heal it until you know what it is.
yeah.
And I think here we are at the very end of, as we've discussed before, the Pluto return for the country. And so I still think we're okay. We need to bring forth some of the insidious things that are still at work in our society that we'd rather not look at. The racism, the fact that women still don't have equal rights, and now the rights they do have are being threatened. All of these things, I think, are the tumultuous piece is coming up for exploration and review.
In the midst of our Pluto return is the United States, in the midst of our Chiron return. And we're heading straight into our Uranus return in the next couple years. And we have 5 planets changing signs next year in 2025. We have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and we have Pluto right now. Those are some big shifts all happening at once. And right now we're shaking it all loose to see what needs to be dislodged, what needs to go.
Oh, it's interesting too. I have a friend who lives down in the South in Alabama who introduced me to some of the people she follows in terms of civil rights activists now. And
Mhm.
there is within those arenas, there's a movement now, I think, to feel the feelings that we have to be in it. And that's part of the healing is that we need to actually feel it in order to metabolize it. And the astrology really seems to confirm that. With all of these strong, potent influences, we're going to feel the feelings. And maybe it's a time to do that. Maybe it's a time actually to allow ourselves to, even as you were talking about with the tenderness around the young people right now, to be with that, to
Mhm.
feel the grief in that, to feel the, I think about myself personally, I grapple with my own powerlessness at sometimes, like, what can I do?
Mhm.
Which is very much what we see in the astrology with all the Pluto activations. Who holds the power? And here we are feeling all of this deep stuff. And how do we show up in it? But I think there's something about trying to be present with it that's coming more to the forefront and trying to hold the place of the witness and hold it gently. And going back to what you said at the very beginning, the universal piece of this whole thing that we're in it together
Mhm.
and try not to make enemies out of it because we're definitely going to feel some of that passion and volatility in the coming months.
And I know it's so annoying when you're going through challenges and you feel like there's certain parts of your life that are falling apart and may very well be falling apart. And it's really annoying when people say, "Oh, it'll be such a gift on the other side," or "It's all going to be fine." And you're just in it reeling, feeling like there's never another side to it. I really sense that in a much larger scale way, that's the state that we're in as a nation. It's so volatile and it doesn't feel the way that we envision our country to be. And it doesn't represent the highest version of our country, its potential. And it's not that our country can ever actually live up to those ideals, but it feels right now that we're so far away from that in so many ways. I almost encourage people just to have compassion, a bit of that tenderness.
Lisa, the next time we get together, we're going to get off of the topic of some of this heavy global mundane astrology and we're going to read a chart together.
I know.
For anybody who's listening, if you want to put your name in the hat for a blind chart reading, natal chart reading, we will be recording that in a couple weeks, right? I think it is.
I believe so.
So,
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to do something a little bit different and throw something in there. You know, that's definitely part of our vision that we're slowly but surely building. So thank you for being patient with us. And it was such a pleasure as always, Sarah, to have these discussions.
Thanks so much. That's all for now. See you next time.
Bye. As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans.
Signing off for now. So until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.